Colonel Adrian Cole's right wrist while her military ID sat face up on the hood of a patrol car. Officer Ryan Mercer looked from the card to her and shook his head. Real colonels don't prove it with something they bought online. Adrian stared at him. For 12 seconds, she said nothing. She had spent 24 years in the Army learning when words helped and when they only gave a bad situation more room to grow. At 46, she was an active duty colonel responsible for logistics readiness across units that moved equipment, fuel, and people on schedules where small errors could become expensive ones. She was used to discrepancies. This one had steel around her wrist. "Officer," she said, keeping her voice even, "that is my common access card. I heard you." Mercer took her left wrist and brought it behind her. The second cuff clicked shut. 10 minutes earlier, Adrian had only wanted coffee. Her tire pressure light had come on during the drive back toward post, so she had pulled into a privately owned gas station off the state highway. She parked beside pump 6, checked the front tire, then went inside for a bottle of water and a cup of coffee. She paid full price. The receipt was still in her coat pocket. The problem started when a man near the condiment counter heard part of her phone conversation. "Yes, this is Colonel Cole." Adrian had said to a major calling about a delayed vehicle movement, "Send the updated readiness sheet before 7. The man, later identified as Curtis Hale, looked at the Army fitness jacket folded over Adrian's arm. "You a colonel?" Adrian had glanced at him. "Yes." "In the Army?" "Yes." He laughed. Then he followed her toward the door. At first, Adrian thought he was just being rude. Then Hale told the cashier, Nina Alvarez, that Adrian had been flashing military stuff and trying to get a discount. Adrian turned around. "I didn't ask for a discount. I heard what you said. You heard a phone call." Hale pointed at the card sleeve visible inside her open wallet. "But that's fake too." Nina raised both hands. "Sir, she paid already." But Hale had taken out his phone. By the time Adrian reached her car, he was talking to a dispatcher. Mercer arrived minutes later. He listened to Hale first. Then he asked Adrian for identification. Adrian handed over her driver's license and Mercer studied the she beneath the gas station canopy. "This doesn't look right. It's valid." "Don't tell me what's valid. I'm telling you what it is." That was when his posture changed. He ordered her to keep her hands where he could see them. Adrian complied. Then her phone vibrated in her right coat pocket. She moved toward it without thinking. Mercer said, "Don't reach." Adrian stopped, but he was already moving. Now the cuffs were on. Her card lay on the patrol car hood under the white canopy lights. Hale stood 20 feet away filming, and Adrian realized this was no longer an argument about a military discount she had never requested. A police officer was creating a record that might describe her as someone falsely claiming to be an Army colonel. Mercer keyed his radio. "Dispatch, I need verification on possible fraudulent military credentials." Adrian looked at the scratched plastic sleeve around her CAC. She knew exactly who she was. The question was how long it would take the officer to know it too, and what he would do once he did. "Am I under arrest?" Adrian asked. Mercer stood behind her near the rear quarter panel of his cruiser. "No. You're detained while I sort this out." Adrian nodded once. The distinction mattered. Across the parking lot, Hale was still talking. "She told me she was a colonel," he said. "People pull this stuff all the time." Nina had come outside. "She didn't ask me for a military discount." Hale swung toward her. "You weren't listening. I rang her up." Mercer looked at Nina. "Mom, go back inside for now." Nina hesitated, then did. Adrian felt the cuffs tighten when she shifted her shoulders. She forced herself to stop moving. A second patrol unit arrived. Officer Leah Brooks stepped out and approached Mercer. "What do we have?" "Possible fake military credential," Mercer said. "Caller says she's claiming colonel." Adrian watched Brooks look at the C on the hood. "Query running." "Yeah." Brooks moved several feet away and started dealing with Hale, who had drifted closer again. Adrian heard radio traffic from Mercer's shoulder microphone, but passing trucks and the gas pumps swallowed parts of it. A dispatcher said something about an identity record, Mercer answered. Adrian could not make out the words. Another transmission came through. Mercer stepped toward the cruiser. Adrian heard only fragments. Match. Active, then static. Mercer pressed the button on his radio. She could not hear his reply. A minute later, Nina came back outside and asked Brooks whether police needed the store transaction record. Brooks told her to keep it. Mercer spoke to Hale again. Then he walked behind Adrian. "I'm taking these off." The pressure disappeared from her left wrist first, then her right. Adrian brought her hands forward slowly. "Is the credential verified?" Mercer picked up the KC and handed it back. "I'm not taking any enforcement action. That wasn't my question. We don't have enough to continue the complaint. Was my military affiliation verified? You're free to go, Mom." Adrian looked at him, then slid the CAC back into its sleeve. She did not argue. She asked for the incident number. Mercer gave it to her. No citation, no arrest, no charge. Adrian went inside before leaving. "Nina, can I get another copy of my receipt?" Nina printed one. At the bottom, the transaction showed coffee, bottled water, tax, and the full retail total. No military discount. Adrian folded the receipt once and placed it inside her wallet. In her car, she opened the Notes app on her phone. She wrote, "Arrived approximately 6:08, police approximately 6:14, presented license and key, moved hand toward pocket when phone vibrated. Officer said, don't reach, uncertain whether movement began before or during command, cuffed approximately 6:16, heard partial radio traffic, could not hear full verification, released approximately 6:24. Then she added one more line. Do not fill gaps from memory later. She sat there for another minute, looking at the red marks around her wrists. She was angry, but anger could wait. At 8:03 that evening, Adrian sent a narrow preservation request identifying the incident number, location, approximate time, responding officers, CAD event, body camera footage, dispatch audio, credential query records, incident report versions, and any store video already requested by police. She attached a photograph of the receipt. She did not accuse Mercer of lying. She also did not ask the department to decide that night whether the handcuffs had been justified. Her request was deliberately narrower. Preserve the records first. Conclusions could come later. She asked them to preserve what existed. Then she saved her own timeline. Before pulling back onto the highway, she photographed the marks on both wrists and emailed the images to herself with the incident number in the subject line. The first clue was almost disappointingly simple: the gas station receipt. 3 days after the incident, Nina Alvarez gave a recorded statement to an investigator assigned to preliminary intake. Adrian received a copy later. Nina confirmed that Adrian had paid full price. No discount? The investigator asked. No. Did she request one? Not from me. Did she show you military identification? No. I saw a card in her wallet later when the officer had it, but she didn't show me anything for the purchase. That did not prove Mercer had acted improperly. It proved something narrower. The allegation that started the encounter was already partly wrong. Curtis Hale had told dispatch that a woman was claiming military status while trying to obtain a benefit. The register record showed no benefit was given, but a false caller could still generate a reasonable police inquiry. Adrian kept reading. The first production packet contained the CAD summary, Mercer's incident report, 2 body camera inventory references, and a records index showing material that had not yet been produced. Mercer's report was mostly restrained. He did not claim Adrian screamed. He did not claim she assaulted anyone. He wrote that officers responded to a reported military impersonation complaint, that Adrian presented military identification, that she moved a hand toward a pocket during the verification process, and that temporary restraints were used while officers controlled the scene. Most of that was at least recognizable. Then she reached the sentence near the end. Military affiliation could not be verified at the scene. Subject was released without charge when additional enforcement action was determined unnecessary. Adrian read it twice. She thought about the radio traffic she had barely heard. Something had changed between the cuffs going on and coming off. The records index contained an entry that made her stop. Credential verification transaction completed. No result appeared in the summary. Only a reference number. Adrian called the professional standards intake investigator, Simone Reed. I need the actual transaction log, Adrian said. Reed replied. We requested it. What does completed mean? It means the transaction finished. That doesn't tell me whether it matched. No, Adrian appreciated the answer. Systems told you what they recorded. You still had to understand the record. That distinction was familiar to Adrian. In logistics, a database could show a vehicle as transferred while the receiving unit was still waiting for the keys. A timestamp could settle one question and create another. She did not want a convenient answer. She wanted a sequence that another person could reproduce without trusting her memory. Adrian requested the gas station video separately through the store. The manager preserved two feeds. One exterior camera showed the pump area and most of Mercer's cruiser. It had no useful audio. A register camera showed Adrian paying. Neither could read the key AC. Neither could establish what Mercer heard over his radio. The exterior camera did show the cuffs. Adrian watched herself move toward her pocket. The angle was poor. Mercer stepped between the camera and her right arm at almost the same moment. She could not tell whether her hand moved before his command or after it. That uncertainty stayed. 5 days later, Simone Reed emailed. The department systems office had produced the credential audit. Adrian opened the attachment. At 6:17:54, the request entered the queue. At 6:18:42, the return status appeared. Verifactive match. Adrian leaned back from the screen. Then she checked the body camera release time again. Mercer removed the cuffs at approximately 6:24:11, more than 5 minutes later. For the first time since the gas station, Adrian thought she had found the answer. She had not. The systems analyst corrected her the next morning. His name was Daniel Cho, and he spoke carefully. The record means the credential query returned a verified active match at 6:18:42, he said. Adrian sat across from him in a conference room at police headquarters. Simone Reed was beside her, so the department knew at 6:18:42. The system had the result. Adrian paused. That's not the same thing. No. Cho explained that the field request routed through department systems and the relevant result was then relayed through communications. The timestamp here is the back-end return. So if Officer Mercer says he didn't receive the result until 6:24, this log doesn't disprove him. Correct. What would? Dispatch audio, device assignment, CAD notes, depending on what was captured. The apparent victory shrank, but evidence that could survive scrutiny had to survive its limits. They reviewed the video next. Mercer's body camera had better audio than the gas station feed, but its view of Adrian's right hand disappeared during the critical seconds. He said, "Keep your hands visible." Adrian's phone vibrated. Her elbow shifted. Mercer said, "Don't reach." Then his body moved into the frame. Adrian heard herself say, "I'm not reaching for a weapon." Mercer responded, "Hands behind your back." No perfect angle. Reed looked at Adrian. "Does this change your recollection?" "It makes me less certain about sequence. Meaning, I know I moved toward the pocket. I don't know if I processed the command before I started moving. What do you believe about the initial cuffs?" Adrian thought carefully. "I believe he reached a conclusion about the card too fast. But I'm not asking you to claim the initial restraint was improper based on a camera that doesn't show everything." Reed typed the answer. The active match timestamp still bothered Adrian. She had been cuffed for more than 5 minutes after it. But if Mercer did not know, the timestamp could not carry the weight she wanted. Reed explained that the master dispatch archive had been preserved, but communication still had to identify the correct channel and radio assignment. On her way out, Adrian looked again at Mercer's report. Military affiliation could not be verified at the scene. If Mercer truly had not received the return, maybe the sentence was defensible. Maybe the cuffs came off for some other reason. Possibility was not proof. That was also why she resisted the urge to send the audit log to everyone she knew. The number looked powerful because it was exact, but an exact timestamp attached to the wrong inference could still mislead. Until she knew how the result moved from the system to Mercer, she had only half a chain. For the next week, Adrian went to work. She told her immediate supervisor that she had been involved in a police detention that ended without arrest or charge, and that she had filed an administrative complaint regarding the record. No call from a general, no military intervention. The case remained a question about what happened at a gas station. Then the department sent its preliminary response. The department did not deny the active match. It argued that Adrian was giving the timestamp more meaning than it deserved. Simone Reed read the central paragraph aloud during their next meeting. The existence of a back-end credential result at 6:18:42 does not independently establish when the responding officer received, heard, or understood that result. Adrian nodded. I agree. Reed looked surprised. You do? Yes. If she ignored that, she would be turning incomplete information into a final conclusion. Reed continued. Additionally, verification of identity does not necessarily terminate a lawful safety restraint if independent scene control concerns remain. Adrian leaned back. There it was. A second defense. Even if Mercer knew she was active duty, he could argue the cuffs remained because of her hand movement, Hale's confrontation, and the people gathering near the pumps. Identity and safety were separate questions. That's stronger, Adrian said. Stronger than what? Than saying he didn't know. If dispatch proves he knew, he can still say the cuffs stayed on for another reason. Reed nodded. That is essentially his position. The department offered a practical resolution. The event classification would be changed from suspected military impersonation to an unfounded credential complaint. The file would show no arrest and no charge. But the original incident report would remain. No sustained finding would address Mercer's sentence that military affiliation could not be verified at the scene. Adrian took the proposal home. For 2 nights, she considered accepting it. She did not want to become known inside her command as the colonel who got into a police dispute at a gas station. She did not want Hale's video circulating. The proposed correction solved most of the practical problem. It would also end the hours of interviews and document review. Adrian could imagine signing the closure letter, putting the folder in a drawer, and deciding that a corrected classification was enough. The option was not cowardly. It was efficient. What stopped her was not pride. It was the sentence that would remain attached to the event. On the 3rd night, she opened Mercer's report again. Military affiliation could not be verified at the scene. Then she opened the credential log, 6:18:42, Veroactive match. She still could not prove Mercer had received it. That was the missing link. She emailed Reed. I declined the proposed closure. I am narrowing my complaint. Reed called 10 minutes later. To what? 2 questions. After military identity was verified, did Officer Mercer reassess the basis for continuing the restraint? And is the statement that my affiliation could not be verified at the scene accurate? You're dropping the allegation that the initial cuffs were necessarily improper. I'm saying the current evidence doesn't settle it. That may weaken your case. It may make it accurate. The next morning, Communications notified Reed that the master dispatch audio and radio device assignment had been authenticated. The missing link existed. Adrian still did not know what it said. Officer Mercer's strongest argument was not that Adrian was fake. By the time Professional Standards interviewed him, he no longer claimed that. His strongest argument was that identity was only one part of the problem. Simone Reed summarized the interview before the evidence conference. Mercer said he arrived on a specific fraud complaint. He saw a military credential he was not trained to authenticate visually. Adrian moved toward a pocket after being told to keep her hands visible. Several civilians were nearby. One was filming and repeatedly trying to intervene. Mercer applied temporary restraints while information was checked and the scene was controlled. Once the situation was stable and no enforcement action was necessary, he removed the cuffs. Did he say when he learned the active match came back? Adrian asked. He said he did not remember the exact time. Did he deny hearing it? No. Reed continued. He also said that even if the active match came back before the cuffs were removed, he may have kept them on briefly because the scene remained unsettled. That's plausible, Adrian said. Yes. Did he document that reassessment? That is one of the issues. Mercer's body cam after the initial restraint became important. For the first 2 minutes, the scene was messy. Hale argued. Brooks told him to step away. A truck pulled too close to the cruiser. Nina came outside. Then Brooks moved Hale toward the storefront. Traffic around the pumps thinned. Adrian stood cuffed beside the cruiser, no longer moving toward any pocket. At 6:23, Nina asked from several feet away, "If she's verified, can she go?" Mercer answered, I'm still sorting out the stolen Valor complaint. Adrian replayed it. The line was not decisive. Maybe he meant the overall call. Maybe he was finishing witness interviews after the identity question had already been resolved. A professional review could not turn an imprecise phrase into proof of misconduct simply because the phrase sounded bad in hindsight. But it made the report sentence harder to understand. The department's proposed correction remained available. Accept it, and the classification changed without a prolonged finding process. Continue, and the review would examine Mercer's reporting as well as the restraint. Adrian's command had already asked whether she needed legal assistance. She declined. This was not an army case. A quiet correction would protect her. A formal review might protect the record. Those were not exactly the same thing. Adrian chose the record. 2 days later, Reed called. We finished authenticating the communications archive. Adrian stood at her office window. And? There's a transmission you need to hear. The department did not play the transmission immediately. First, Daniel Cho established which radio Mercer carried. Then a communications supervisor authenticated the archive clock against the CAD system. Reed confirmed that the dispatcher handling Unit 318 was reading the same credential query return shown in the audit log. Adrian wanted that foundation. Otherwise, the words that came next would be dramatic, not reliable. Cho displayed the credential record. 6/18/42. Verifact match. The communications supervisor started the audio. At 6:19:07, the dispatcher's voice came through clearly. 3:18. Credential return matches Adrian Cole. Active duty military status confirmed. 5 seconds passed, then Mercer's voice. Copy, active match. Adrian did not move. Reed stopped the audio. There it was. Adrian had heard enough radio traffic in military operations to know how easily a clipped acknowledgement could be overread. So Reed played the exchange again with the surrounding transmissions. The dispatcher was not discussing another subject or another unit. The credential return was tied to Adrian's name, Mercer's unit, and the same query number shown in the audit log. Not a general recognizing her, not a surprise witness. The department's system had verified her, its dispatcher had relayed it, and Mercer had acknowledged the result. Reed looked at Adrian. This establishes knowledge of the return, yes. It does not automatically establish that the cuffs had to come off at 6:19:13. I know, they continued. At 6:23 came Nina's question. If she's verified, can she go? Mercer's answer. I'm still sorting out the stolen Valor complaint. At 6:21:16, Brooks told Mercer that Hale had been moved away and was no longer interfering. At 6:22:4, Adrian asked whether the credential was valid. Mercer answered, stand by. At 6:24:11, he removed the cuffs. Reed turned to Adrian. What finding are you asking for now? Not that he intentionally lied. And the restraint? I want the review to decide whether there was a documented independent safety basis after identity was resolved. You're not asking us to call the whole detention unlawful? No. The records don't answer every legal question. They answer what happened. Reed closed her notebook. That is a narrower complaint. It's the complaint the evidence supports. The formal evidence conference was scheduled for the following week. Mercer would be allowed to explain the timeline. His supervisor would address policy. Communications would authenticate the radio sequence. Professional standards would decide what, if anything, could be sustained administratively. That evening, Adrian drove past the gas station without stopping. She saw Pump 6 through the passenger window. The story was no longer about whether anyone believed she was a colonel. That question had been answered at 6:18:42. The real question was what an officer did with verified information after it contradicted the assumption that brought him there. The evidence conference lasted 93 minutes. No one raised their voice. That made the contradictions harder to avoid. Simone Reed began with the caller. Curtis Hale reported suspected military impersonation and an attempt to obtain a military-related benefit. The register receipt and Nina's statement contradicted the benefit portion. But the call still gave Mercer a reason to investigate. Next came the initial restraint. Bodycam showed Adrian's hand moving toward her coat pocket. The angle did not establish the exact sequence clearly enough to resolve whether Mercer reacted before or after she processed his command. Professional standards did not sustain a finding against the initial cuffing. Adrian accepted that. Then Daniel Cho put the credential audit on the screen. 6/18/42, Verifactive match. The communications supervisor played the dispatch relay. 6/19/7, credential return matches Adrian Cole, active duty military status confirmed. Then Mercer, 6/19/12, copy, active match. Reed turned to Mercer. At that point, did you understand the system had verified Ms. Cole's military affiliation? Mercer shifted in his chair. I understood that the return matched her identity and active status. Did you believe she was still falsely claiming to be military? I believed I still had to finish the call. That wasn't the question. Mercer paused. No. I didn't have reason at that point to think she was lying about being active duty. Reed played the next body cam segment. 6/23. Nina, if she's verified, can she go? Mercer, I'm still sorting out the stolen Valor complaint. Mercer explained that he was referring to the totality of the dispatch call, not saying he still believed Adrian was an imposter. The explanation was possible. Reed did not dismiss it. She marked the distinction on the chronology. Verified identity on one line, asserted safety concerns on another. If the restraints continued for safety rather than identity, the file needed to show what changed, what remained dangerous, and when that independent basis ended. Then Reed asked about the cuffs. Mercer said the scene remained active, Hale was agitated, Adrian had made an earlier pocket movement, and he needed time to determine whether there were other issues. Brooks's body cam partly supported him. For a short period after verification, Hale was still arguing. But at 6/21/16, Brooks told Mercer that Hale had been separated. The video showed Adrian standing still beside the cruiser. No new threat was documented, no new safety warning was given, no separate basis for continued restraint appeared in Mercer's report. The cuffs stayed on until 6/24/11. Then Reed projected the final sentence. Military affiliation could not be verified at the scene. Mercer read it. I meant I couldn't personally authenticate the credential. Reed looked at him. Is that what the sentence says? No. Was her military affiliation verified at the scene? Mercer looked at the dispatch transcript. Yes. The room remained quiet. Adrian felt no rush of triumph. The answer mattered because it was precise. Reed summarized the evidence. Initial police contact was supported by the complaint. The available recording did not establish enough to sustain a violation concerning the initial use of temporary restraints. But once verification resolved the central identity question, Mercer had an obligation under departmental procedure to reassess the basis for continued restraint. Professional standards found the documented justification insufficient after the scene stabilized. That finding was sustained. The report accuracy issue was also sustained. The department did not find sufficient evidence to conclude Mercer intentionally falsified the report. Inaccuracy was not the same as proven dishonesty. When the conference ended, Mercer gathered his papers. For a moment, he and Adrian stood on opposite sides of the table. He did not apologize. She did not demand one. Nothing about the room suggested a career had ended. There was no applause, no general waiting outside. Only a record that had finally become more accurate than the assumption that created it. The written findings arrived 5 weeks after the gas station encounter. Adrian read them at her kitchen table. The original incident report remained preserved. It was not erased. Instead, the department permanently linked the administrative finding and corrected classification to the report. Any authorized future review of the incident would show that Adrian's military status had been verified at the scene before the restraints were removed. It would also show that professional standards sustained a failure to resus finding regarding the continued restraint and sustained a report accuracy finding. The initial contact finding was not sustained. The initial cuffing finding was not sustained. Intentional falsification was not established. The language was careful. It did not give Adrian everything she had believed on the first night. It did not say the officer had targeted her because of race, and it did not declare the initial cuffs unlawful. Those conclusions were not established by the administrative record. Adrian appreciated it. A separate supervisory notice stated that Mercer would receive remedial review concerning verification procedures and documentation requirements. Any additional personnel action was confidential. Adrian did not ask for more. She had never filed the complaint to discover whether Ryan Mercer lost money, rank, assignments, or sleep. She wanted the record to stop saying something the department's own systems showed was untrue. Her command learned only what it needed to know. There had been a detention, no arrest, no charge. A municipal administrative review corrected the record. Life moved. Readiness meetings continued. Vehicles still broke. Supply numbers still failed to match what people swore had been delivered. 2 months later, she was driving home after a long Thursday when she realized she had skipped lunch and most of dinner. She pulled into a convenience store several miles farther down the same highway. Not the gas station from the incident. Another one. Same fluorescent canopy, same coffee machines. Adrian stood in line behind a construction worker buying lottery tickets. When it was her turn, she set coffee and a protein bar on the counter. "Anything else?" the cashier asked. "That's it." Adrian opened her wallet. Her CA sat behind her driver's license inside the same clear, protective sleeve. The edge was still scratched. For a moment she looked at it. Weeks earlier, that piece of plastic had sat on a patrol car hood while a stranger filmed her and an officer decided he did not believe what it represented. Then the card had become evidence. A query number, a timestamp, a radio transmission, a sentence in a report. Now it was only an identification card again. Adrian pulled out her credit card instead. The cashier rang up the purchase. No discount, no questions. No one asked whether she was really a colonel. No one recognized her. No one saluted. She carried the coffee outside and walked toward her car. Before closing her wallet, she pushed the khaki a little deeper into its sleeve so the scratched edge would not catch. Then she put it away. The record had finally caught up to the truth. Adrian did not need the rest of the world to make a ceremony out of it.